up guys, welcome back and hello if you are new. I hope all of you had a really fantastic weekend. So after the explosive EP that was released from Better Lovers called God Made Me an Animal, at last we are finally hearing the fruits of their labour, which is their debut album, Highly Irresponsible.
Hard to look up when you're down. No perspective from the ground.
So if you're not familiar with Better Lovers, they are made up of multiple members. There's 3/5 of previous Every Time I Die. There's Greg Puciato, who used to be in the Dillinger Escape Plan. He's got his solo stuff, The Black Queen, Killer Be Killed, lots of different things. And then you've got Will Putney, who is also in Fit for an Autopsy and producer extraordinaire. So I would say one of the biggest things about this record is there is definitely a sort of combination of all of these bands present. If anything, I would say the ghosts of Every Time I Die kind of haunt this record the most. And the thing I found a little bit difficult in the beginning is that there are some phrases on this record that are written very similarly to how Keith, the previous singer, would have sung them. And that's no slight against Greg, because Greg is an absolutely fantastic singer. He's got amazing range and incredible ability and power. But there were some songs on here which made it sound like it was Every Time I Die with Greg, which I wasn't as big of a fan of, because they sort of stuck out a little bit. Whereas we had an amazing run, which was A White Horse Covered in Blood, Future Myopia, and Deliver Us From Life. 3 amazing songs. I really, really love those songs because they are very different. They don't necessarily sound too much like Dillinger Escape Plan. They don't necessarily sound too much like Every Time I Die. But that's when you've got tracks like Drowning in a Burning World, which for me felt like it was just a little bit flying too close to that Every Time I Die son for my liking. But that's the thing. And I mention this because I think it's important to know, but that doesn't mean necessarily that these songs are bad. They just sound kind of similar to past sort of things. If anything, they are absolutely the opposite of bad. They're really, really, really great songs and really well put together. So I think maybe if you haven't listened to, either of the bands, Dillinger, or Every Time I Die, if anything, you might approach this record in a different way and see the band for what it is. And I think that they really do bring something really interesting to the table when you kind of get past that. Your Misplaced Self is a great example of when Greg just sounds like a snarling, rabid animal, and he really kind of goes for it pretty much. But it's, for me, the more unexpected moments that I love seeing from Greg, where he really sort of shines through and straddles that sort of crazy aggression and that amazing crooning that he's so good at. Like At All Times is definitely a big highlight for me. Future Myopia, as I mentioned. There are just some really great melodies on here that, yes, they're similar, but they're also exploring something different as well. And I think A White Horse Covered in Blood as well is one of those where it does kind of look for something different and what the band can kind of bring to the table, really, I think. But what I think is the weird commonality on this record is there's a bit of a darkness to it. It's kind of, it almost hits each performer's separate bands as well. If you were to sort of close your eyes and listen to Lie Between the Lines or Deliver Us From Life, you could kind of imagine hearing that in either Low Teens, Every Time I Die, or, Dillinger Escape Plan, or the sort of Alice in Chains kind of, even atmospheric stuff of Fit for an Autopsy, you could hear that. So that's what I found really, really interesting. And I think that grunge track in the middle really does kind of give the album a bit of breathing space that is really important, especially when you've got stuff which is as crazy as some of the frenetic riffs that are going on here. I also think the breakdowns are incredibly clever. It's down to that sort of songwriting, really. Like Future Myopia definitely kind of brings things back and then it almost disassembles part of a verse riff and then brings it back together to have that impact. But I also really loved Superman Died Paralyzed because it's got those panic chords, and it really kind of reminds us that when these guys want to throw down, they can absolutely throw down. And it's probably one of the heaviest points, I think, on the record. Bass, I think, is really kind of in the pocket on this album. And
You'll become love.
But there are some times where the bass sort of, takes a bit more of the limelight. Love as an Act of Rebellion, for example. That track in particular, I really like the sort of psychedelic feel of it. Even though it's weird, there's kind of like this progressive sort of idea that's as an undercurrent on this this album as well. It's a real combination of different sort of styles that we've seen from the band, and the solos as well. I think that it's fair to give their sort of shake. At All Times, I think, has a really sort of more out there, again, psychedelic sort of vibe to the solo. But and I think the length of this record is very important because it's so intense. I think it's about 34 minutes or something like that. So it doesn't overstay its welcome. And because there's so much packed into it, you kind of come back to it again and again. I've noticed this, especially this year. Maybe it's my attention span or something, but I'm kind of enjoying some of the shorter records, where there's a lot of energy and a lot of ideas that are packed into one thing. But because it's short, you can kind of come back to it again. And the great thing about this album is there is such a big variety of sounds. I know I sort of started this by talking about how they are quite similar to their previous bands and things like that. And in one way, yes, it is. But in another way, there is something completely new going on here, which I think is really exciting. Will Putney does a fantastic job on production. You can hear everything you want to hear, all the bits, where things kind of essentially get a little bit more deconstructed. You can hear a little bit more of the sort of psychedelic ideas, but then when it needs to, it really comes home and hits hard. And
You taught yourself a lie that you repeat it. You taught yourself a lie that you repeat it. You taught yourself a lie that you repeat it. You taught yourself.
And I think that's the cool thing about this, in terms of like a Fit for an Autopsy angle. The atmosphere is kind of that sort of dark, a bit malevolent sort of feel to it as well, which is really interesting. But the truly great moments of this record come from that new sound of the band. It ranges from At All Times, Future Myopia, to Deliver Us From Life. But then it's also in the heavier aspects of the band sound. So like A White Horse Covered in Blood, for example, or Love as an Act of Rebellion, especially that end sort of psychedelic sort of idea. So on their debut album, Better Lovers might have a few hauntings from their previous, bands that they were in and all that sort of stuff. But the great news is that the material that they do have when they come together is brilliant. It's really interesting, it's innovative, it doesn't sound like anything out there. And I'm very, very excited to see what the future holds for this band, because this is clearly just the tip of the iceberg. So in terms of a rating, I would probably have to say this record's maybe an 8 out of 10. There's a lot of stuff I really, really like about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this album review. Let me know what you think in the comments underneath me. I always appreciate all the feedback you guys give me. And let me know what you think of the record when it comes out on the 25th of October. Other than that, I'll see you guys very soon for another album review. Take care, my friends, and thanks for tuning in.